the war in Amhara is very, very strange for many reasons. One of which is that it is not something that people talk about. It's a quiet war. It's a war that is being conducted in darkness, and as a result, we don't really know much. We don't quite know what position or standing the Fano militants have. We don't quite know how much of the region is controlled by the Abiy regime. We don't quite know what kind of fighting goes on there. We do from time to time hear that there were drone strikes and skirmishes and Fano controlling airports and similar civilian installations. But other than those very, very rare reports, we don't really know much. And the conventional international media don't seem to be interested in reporting about it either. And I've always wondered why. Why it is that this is a war that people are uninterested about. But anyway, there was a break from tradition 2, 3 days ago. The BBC published a report about one aspect of the war, and it's a grim aspect. They published a powerful report about rape in the Amhara region, and to be specific, rape committed by Ethiopian soldiers on Amhara women. And I thought I would say a few things about it because I think it's high time that people had a serious discussion about why rape is so accepted and normal in Ethiopia. There is something that is fundamentally wrong about the way people perceive and understand rape, as a consequence of which the soldiers have come to believe that it is perfectly normal and acceptable to go around and rape women. Anyway, I will share with you three stories from the BBC report, and towards the end, I'm going to make some broad points about rape. I think that always um, that make me confused about the Ethiopian psyche in relation to rape. Anyway, three stories first. The first one, that of a young lady. The BBC calls Innat. The BBC uses pseudonyms for protection. She was at the time she was raped. 21 year old. She lived in Gondar then. I think still does. And one one night, three soldiers broke in to her house, and they asked her if Fano militias had been around the area on that day, and she tells them the truth, that indeed they were around, and then the troops say that she had assisted the Fano without any evidence, in some sense. But anyway, they then proceed to rape her. I think it's a gang rape, actually. I'm sorry, I might be misrepresenting here, and I shouldn't be misrepresenting these kind of grave um, stories. But they gang raped her. indeed. And in the story, she gives account of that experience and how she has been feeling since. And she says in the story, um, so I'm going to quote verbatim what she tells the BBC. She says, "I begged them not to hurt me. I called on the saints and begged them, but their hearts didn't pity me. They violated me." When she says violated, she means they gang raped her. A 21-year-old young woman. And she tells the BBC that she had never known a man and that she had been engaged and that she was looking forward to the day when she would be married. And she was, she made this commitment not to engage in any sort of sexual activity before marriage, as is typical in Ethiopia. And this happened, this horrible thing happened to her. And and then she got pregnant from this horrible experience. And she sought to carry out abortion, but for one for religious reasons, as she recounts, she didn't. And now she has a daughter from that horrible experience. And she tells the BBC that it would have been better if they had killed her instead. And now she talks about how horrible life is now, raising a daughter, not having a job, being stigmatized, feeling ashamed, even though it's not her fault that they gang raped her. And she had this horrible existence. So that is the story of what the BBC calls a nut. And then there is another one called the BBC calls Tigist, 18-year-old from Gojam. And one night, when she was going home from work, 3 soldiers again gang raped her outside on her way back home. And Tigist too was engaged, and now she has broken off the engagement because of what the soldiers did to her. And she tells the BBC that she has attempted suicide, but thankfully she hasn't succeeded. Family members intervened, and she says that she has now made a commitment to her family to continue living, which is positive. But she talks of how life has become extremely difficult, how she avoids going to church, how she avoids joining conversations because she had this fear that everybody knows what happened to her. And again, as is sadly typical in Ethiopia, she thinks that she is to blame for what happened to her. And she's only 18, or at least she was 18 then. And this is something that happened in 2024 with 2025 now. So she will be 19 now. So still a teenager. And the third one, the story of a young woman again, 23-year-old woman. The BBC calls Lemlem. She's from Gondar. And a soldier first groped her, and then at first she managed to keep him at bay, and then people intervened, and he left her alone. But because he knew where she lived, he came back and he raped her. And this is what she tells the BBC. I wept non-stop for a month. I couldn't eat. All I did was cry. I couldn't stand to walk, and I feel gravely ill. And she adds, it is repulsive to have been born a woman. If I were a man, he might have beaten me and walked away, but he wouldn't have destroyed my life like this. So now she finds herself in a situation where she's blaming her being a woman because this criminal from the Ethiopian Defense Forces raped her. And she talks about how life has become horrible. Like Tigray, she doesn't go to church, she doesn't socialize, she has completely isolated herself. She has imposed a lot of restrictions on her life, even though she hasn't done anything wrong. And these really horrible, extraordinarily painful experiences for these three young women who had a lot of dreams for their lives. And just like that, because rape has been normalized in the country, because for some reason the members of the Ethiopian Defense Forces think rape is unacceptable thing to do to completely innocent women. Their lives have been, in a lot of senses, cut short. I mean, thankfully they are alive, and I hope that somehow they make the best out of their lives. But I can't even begin to imagine how painful a life they must have now. And indeed, that's what they say. And of course, this is nothing new. We know what the Ethiopian soldiers are like from the Tigray genocide, from what they did there. We know of the we know about the 120, and it could be an underestimation of Tigrayan women who were brutally raped in various ways by Ethiopian and the Fano themselves and Ethiopian Defense Forces. So we know that the Ethiopian members of the Ethiopian Defense Forces are given to going around and raping women. And we know that it's completely acceptable because when we try to bring this to the attention of people about the rape, about the insertion of foreign bodies to women's um, insertion objectives to women's bodies, by and large, we were made fun of. There was a sense of acceptance among the Ethiopian or the Addis Ababa elite. And one one moment comes to mind when in a twist of irony, the BBC interviewed this lady from Addis Ababa who pretends to be head of a feminist organization. She appeared on the BBC and she was asked what her organization was doing about the mass rape in Tigray. And she astonishingly said that rape was to be expected in war, that it was an inevitable consequence of the war, which she blamed on the TPLF, as many people do when it comes to the Tigray war. They say that it was the TPLF that started the war and that everything that followed, including the mass rape, was completely to blame on the TPLF. That the TPLF should carry this responsibility on its shoulders. And I think people have to ask why. Why is it that people are more than happy, especially the Addis Ababa elites? Now I have to focus on them. Why is it that they are more than happy to find justifications for rape? Because it is that sense of it being accepted that is emboldening these young men, terrible young men, to go around and do what they did in Tigray. Why is it that Ethiopians can't bring themselves to say in one voice that rape is an abominable thing to do on a fellow woman? And why? I think that is something that people should really, really dwell on. Why is it that it is very difficult for people? I mean, this so forget the Tigray because that is of a completely different scale. I mean, it's unheard of for 120,000 women to have been raped in the most gruesome, in the most cruel manner. That requires a completely different vocabulary to even begin to describe, to capture the magnitude. So that is different. But let's just focus on what has happened to these three young women in Amhara. If something like this had happened in any other self-respecting country, there would be uproar in that country. People would be talking about that. People would be trying to find the perpetrators, and people would be doing everything in their power to make sure that they are held to account. But there is nothing of that sort in Ethiopia. It's not that people don't read these stories. People read the BBC, not least because it's also reported by the BBC Amharic, which has a big readership in Addis Ababa because it's thought to be cool to read the BBC. Um, so they could pretend to be smart in their stupid parties. So why is it that it has become acceptable? I think this is something that now I trust that everyone who follows us on Tighat is as outraged as I am. My working assumption is that people who watch Tighat and people who follow us are sensible people, that they might, although there are a lot of people from, as you recall from my previous two videos, there are a lot of people who are inclined or who want or who contrive reasons to deny what happened in Tigray. But let's leave that to one side. let's be charitable to our listeners and viewers. I would like to believe that every one of you finds rape reprehensible. So I'm not trying to preach to you. That would be preaching to the choir. But I think we have to together ask why it is that rape has been normalized in the country. I think people should write about this. People should have serious, painful, uncomfortable discussions about this. And the people like the lady that I mentioned earlier who appeared on the BBC to justify rape in some sense, of course she would deny that was what she did, but effectively that's what she did. But I think people should name and shame them like I am doing now, and I'm being charitable because I could have mentioned her name. But it's not in my nature to mention names, but I would be perfectly happy for people to do that because that's exactly what needs to happen, I think. But anyway, this is something that people should reflect on and and about what is happening in the Amhara. I have my contempt for the Fano. I'm completely against everything that the Fano represent, not least because of their criminality in Tigray, because of what they have done in Western Tigray. But I don't confuse that with my care and affection for the Amhara people. And it pains me that this is being done to young Amhara women who are completely faultless, completely blameless. So our position or our indignation against rape shouldn't be conditioned on what we think of the Fano as a militia group or as a political group. I find them abominable. I find them reprehensible. I have no track for them, but I still find it painful what the Ethiopian soldiers are doing in the Amhara region. But anyway, I just wanted to bring the grim stories to your attention. But also, I wanted to use that to ask the broader question, which is why rape has become acceptable in Ethiopia. Because it is only in a country where it is acceptable that 120,000 women could be raped in the space of 2 years, as 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 happened in Tigray. And there's no telling how many women have been raped in the Amhara region, because as I said in the beginning, nobody's talking about it for some reason. And maybe another question, another broader point that I should have raised is how did Abiy manage to buy in the consent of the Amhara establishment? Because it's only with the consent of the Amhara establishment that regimes in Ethiopia could do horrible things. Because let's face it, the Amhara establishment control the media, they control a university, they control a lot of things. I'm not trying to be, I'm not trying to perpetuate any sort of conspiracy theory here. It's true, and maybe I'll come back to it, why I think that is the case. But anyway, Abiy had the buy-in of the consent of the Amhara establishment, and it is the Amhara civilians, completely innocent people, who are paying the price for that. And why? Why is that? And it goes without saying that it was thanks to the buy-in of the Amhara establishment that Abiy invaded in collaboration with Isaias Tigray, and his troops committed the crime that I just described. So I think people should reflect, and we should find ways to get these conversations going. Thank you for the listen. I hope it wasn't a boring monologue. And If you like the content we create here, please do subscribe. But for today, thank you. Bye bye.